Hi folks, we're Taskless Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of bringing in, gazillions of third world, tribal, low IQ peasants from strictly moral societies, Islamic societies in particular, and bringing these people into the West in large numbers, particularly young men. Now, they're brought from a society where there are strict, brutally enforced moral codes, particularly in regard to women, the role of women, interacting with women, and what women wear, women go. They have to have a male, family member accompany them and chaperone them and so on. Then bring these people into the West, which by contrast and by any measure really is hyper-sexualised of women. So these young men move from that sort of society into the Western society, and Western governments make no attempt to induct them, or the most feeble attempts at inducting them. And then they come into the West and they see this hypersexualization, which they've been taught since childhood is a sign of moral decadence in the extreme, and people that are A, non-believers, and B, engaging in such moral decadence deserve anything unfortunate that comes to them. And so these people don't believe they're really doing anything wrong. Well, look at the way, look at the behavior here. How can we be doing anything wrong? And so from a severely repressed culture to a hypersexualized one, without any lengthy induction and preparation, what do we think is going to happen? But somehow the Western authorities seem not to care. They almost seem not to want to even make an effort to come to grips with it. Now, as disturbing as people who are arriving from these third world countries, and I'll come back to that in a minute because I've traveled extensively through these countries, when they come to the West and have children, even the first generation Western born still has, in some cases, even more devout in terms of and pious in terms of their observances in regards to gender relations, and social behaviour overall. So let's just have a look at this so we can understand the difference. If you haven't travelled to a devout Islamic society, then you kind of don't know the extent to which and the breadth and the depth that the Islamic code affects all interactions and behaviours. Now, I've been societies that in Islamic terms at least are reasonably liberal. Women can work. They don't all have to wear head scarf covering or burqas or hijabs or anything like that. There are certain jobs, occupations, like say government employment, all that, where you do have to. But in the private sector, there are some sectors of the economy where women don't have to do that, and they can travel unaccompanied and those sorts of things. So anyway, now I've also been societies where they're extremely devout and where women are not allowed to work at all. I think women up to the primary school, they're allowed to go to school, but not in high school, or maybe up to first year high school. It depends. There are certain subjects that women don't go to university and these sorts of things. So, and again, a woman can't go anywhere with that. In some places, one instance where I was going through an airport terminal and there was a woman there, and I bumped down and said, "Look, excuse me," and she had these couple of male chaperones that that just leapt out and explained to me in rather harsh terms that I'm not allowed to talk to her. She's not allowed to talk to me, even more importantly, and that I should hey, Christian white boy, just mind your own fucking business and keep out the way, was the general message. So you have to be cautious. So when I go to these places, I'm very deferential and observing and mindful of observing their customs and their respecting their religious issues and so on. And if someone's been to Mecca, I ask their permission to call them Haji. If someone's got Haji in the name, it means they've been to Mecca, for Hajj. And so I make a point of showing respect and deference at every opportunity. Even so, as I've been to some meetings in these places where, as a white boy Christian, I'm viewed with a mixture of sort of contempt, suspicion, and you're a fucking infidel. Times gone by, we would just cut you up and kill you. And I'm sitting at these meetings talking to these people thinking, holy fuck, am I going to get out of the building alive? But they do tolerate the Westerners, the Christians, as long as you're giving away a lot of free stuff. Well, you're giving away the free, even as a traveling, guy in business, as long as I'm giving out money and free stuff and benefits and these things, then they'll tolerate me. But otherwise, no free stuff. We won't even piss on you. And so it's hardly a two-way respectful situation. They already perceive a non-believer is an infidel and shouldn't be allowed to live in more ideal conditions. We will let you live as long as you give us free stuff. And I think that's mirrored also by the arrival of these people in the West. As long as you're giving us free stuff, we'll forgive your sins, but only up until that time. You stop the free stuff, no more forgiveness. Now, you come from these places where you walk down the street and every woman either has a burqa or a hijab, or at the very minimum, a scarf head covering. And even in those hot climates, which many of them are, they still have, they're very modestly dressed. Which I don't care. But you get the men who are used to that and brought up in those sorts of circumstances and conditions, with a call to prayer, as happens multiple times a day, all these sorts of things. And then they come to the West and they see, girls, it's summertime, girls wearing the skimpiest outfits, schoolgirls wearing skimpy outfits and 12-year-old girls wearing, very short dresses and plunging necklines. They see advertising of women's clothing. Women are walking around unaccompanied, while wearing skimpy outfits, and they see all this. And bear in mind, they're not high IQ, sophisticated people. They've been brought up with a very rigid code, and they see all this, and in their cognizance, they're looking at Sodom and Gomorrah. They're looking at a society that has lost its moral compass in the extreme, and there are no moral codes left. There's nothing for them to corrupt. So if they have intimate relations with 13, 14-year-old girls or encourage them, your society is already decadent and fucked. You have no moral code. What possibly could we be corrupting that isn't already corrupted is their sort of general view. Now, the desirability of bringing people like this into the West first should be questioned. Secondly, that they're not given a very severe and intense induction campaign. An education where they're told, look, there are certain do's and don'ts here. You may think that this means that these young women are all available for rando, sexual encounters, but it doesn't mean that. In our society, we have a highly developed commercial structure where we sell goods and services. The sexualization is part of the wider commercial structure, not sexualization in itself. There's no attempt to sexualize these young girls outside of the commercial implications of selling goods and services to a market, effectively. So these are all issues to be considered and understood. And when you bring people in from a tribal, rural tribal peasants with an IQ of 70 that procreate with 13-year-old cousins and nephews and nieces and goodness knows what, then then they don't see what the problem is. They come, well, why if it's a problem, why do you sexualize them? If it's a problem, why do you allow girls to walk around unaccompanied? I mean, look, if you don't do that, it must mean you have no problem with us going around raping them. By the way, it's not rape. How can it be rape? Rape implies a moral code, and you guys don't have a moral code, therefore, and so on. So there's many more. It's more nuanced than just straight. Sexualization of children or just a Islamic moral code. If you look at it into the wider fabric of the interaction, then now why the authorities in the West haven't understood this, or maybe they don't care. Maybe these Islamic low IQ peasants are being used as a tool of repression against the white society, showing you guys aren't, you're not even, you're nothing, you people. And, we're going to import these folks who can do whatever they want to you, and we won't stop them. That type of attitude. And you do suspect that is at the back of the mind of some of these people. Now, to suggest that white societies, working class white societies, where, there are single mother households everywhere you look, that intimate relations between 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds never went on at all. It did. So that also is part of the wider range of considerations I think that we need to look at. But again, the central point is you come from hyper-sexual, or you come from hyper-social control societies. Not so much that applies to the upper classes, and I'll come back to that in a minute, to hyper-sexualized societies. And the collision of cultures, would be obvious to any observer from the outset. And why surprise is feigned, or that's racism, and why all these silly nonsense arguments and so on, and superior moralizing are trotted out is incomprehensible to me. The problem was obvious. I could have told every Western country you will get these problems straight away once you start importing such people into a society with such a very different view of sexualization. Now, again, in these societies they come from, they don't have a developed commercial structure. So they can't draw the relationship between the commercialization of sexualization and the actual sexualization. They can't see the difference there and don't understand it. They have no commercial understanding there. So now with the upper classes, it's very different, somewhat different. They don't have to demonstrate their piety because Islam is used as much as religion has been in other places, as a method of socially controlling the masses and keeping them in order and keeping them in check. Some of it's quite, in its way, is worthwhile. If you injure a handicapped person, whether they be mentally or physically handicapped, then you're damned for all eternity, because a mentally handicapped person, for example, is under the direct protection of Allah. And if you injure or harm that person, then again, you're damned for all eternity. What this means, however, given cousin marriage and all this sort of thing, there are vast numbers of hideously deformed people in these societies, but no one dare touch them, otherwise they'll be damned by Allah. So now with the upper classes, it's a little bit different in these Islamic societies. They do a lot of international travel. Many of them have been educated in the West, and when they're away from sort of prying eyes, they'll partake of alcohol, and they'll engage in behaviors that many of us would consider quite sordid. Now, in the 5-star Western hotels in these places too, local women are allowed to work, and they don't have to wear any head covering. They're allowed to dress as Western women would. And also there's I don't know what you call them, the employees of the hotel, the operatives. There's a guy on each floor. Labor's cheap there, so you tend to have a lot of people working there. So the on each floor there's a guy at a desk who's, I don't know what you call him, the floor concierge or something like that, and they too are sleazy as fuck, and they come around knocking on your door. If you're a Western guy, and knocking on your door, offering you, call girl, the equivalent of call girl services, and they'll go through a menu, where, hey, we can fix up a girl for you, and or we can fix up an underage girl for you. So the very idea that there are, girls, I don't know what age, I assume under the age of 17 or something, that are available, and they can convey them to the hotel for sexual purposes. You've got to be kidding me! In a society like this, and you guys, with this supposedly rigid moral code, and yet here you are knocking on my fucking door, and the guy's even got his little religious hat on, and then if that doesn't interest you, they can say, well, do you want a young boy? So there's a buffet being offered by these people. So the idea that they're all sort of subscribing and to the same moral code, or to the highest level of moral code, is quite misplaced. And they often have sort of like rooftop sort of I don't know, like penthouse restaurant type hybrid things. And that's where the local, again, the upper class women go and put on their bikinis and go sunbaking and this sort of stuff, and drinking alcohol. So there's certain rules that the upper classes don't need to observe. I was at one time, I was in again quite a devout Islamic country, and I went to visit some. It was only a few hours before I had to go to the airport, I remember, in this time. So I went to visit this it was actually a religious monument that apparently had been built many hundreds of years ago, and it wasn't that far from the hotel I was staying at. So, and I thought it's kind of on the way to the airport. So I went there, and having a look around, and it was quite impressive architecture, really, for the time, and must have taken a lot of labor to build it. And there was a bunch of private schoolgirls there on an excursion, which was religious, based on religious instruction, by the way. And they were, I don't know, high school, I would think 15 years old, 16, somewhere around there. and they saw me, and they all these shrieks and screams, and they started running towards me as a group, and I thought, goodness me, what's going on here? And their teacher, who was dressed in full-on religious garb with just the eyes showing, she pursued them. One of their minders was dressed the same way, two teachers maybe, and they sort of chased after the girls. But the girls sort of were, again, these were upper class girls, and the teachers were of a lower social caste, if you like, and therefore had only certain level of control over these girls. And they all gathered around me and surrounded me, and said that demanded almost that I had to agree to having my photograph taken with them. And the ones closest to me draped themselves over me in a way that was, I thought, I don't know, softcore sexual, I suppose, but it was a pose that you would see in a Western magazine. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And so I stood there as bewildered as the teachers were, as they looked at me, and I looked back at them and thought, what's going on? So the one of their number, the schoolgirls, had a camera, and top of the range camera, by the way, and she said that she wouldn't take the picture until I smiled appropriately. So I did. But that was in a deeply religious side. But the girls were dressed in, it wouldn't be Western standard. It was very modest. Like they had light white blouses on, and their skirts were ankle length, and were very, very appropriate, I guess. There's certainly nothing inappropriate in the way they were dressed. And I didn't see any makeup or anything like that. Whereas, a 16-year-old schoolgirl in the West, well, not everyone, certainly in a government school, would be highly sexualized by comparison. So I mean, but if I had a daughter, I mean, when I go past a private girls' school and I see how well dressed they are, how well turned out, and how modest their clothing is, and how they look far more studious, and that they've been hitting the books and all that thing, I'd rather my daughter went there than went to some, working class government high school where the girls were all walking around in bum cheek short dresses, that sort of thing. That to me doesn't imply a student that's engaging in any sort of rigorous bookwork. But nonetheless, that was it. But these kids were from a wealthy school. They were the children of the wealthy elites, and so they have permissions that others don't have. Now, this can be the opposite case, say in the case of, or an example of the Saudi Arabian prince, who has got the wife, and the wife is, you're told, my wife, this is my wife, whatever. By the way, you're not permitted to speak to her, nor is she permitted to speak to you. And okay, fine, it doesn't bother me. I'm in your country; it's your rules, and I respect that. But when you consider the difference in behaviours and attitudes, now I don't condemn their attitudes. I say, well, we don't think women should work. We don't think women should go around unaccompanied. We think women should wear their their hijabs, their burqas, or whatever. I mean, would I sort of do that sort of thing? Does it fit in? No. But I do respect that they've developed that over thousands of years for various reasons, and I do respect that, and I respect their right to do it in their country, in their way. And I don't like the idea of white people coming along and moralising and saying how deficient brown people are in their social structures. I don't think that's right. But equally, I don't think it's right to bring people like that into a very different culture. And again, I come back to this hyper-sexualized, it's in a commercial lens, hyper-sexualized West, to the very different and very brutally devout and pious social control methods used in Islamic societies. I don't believe the two are compatible, and I suspect never will be. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.